ag was not an area of business that used technology. And yet it has a real transformative power when you use blockchain for supply chain and food safety, and when you use artificial intelligence to do precision farming and increase crop yields or increase the health of a herd of cattle. There are just so many ways that you can preserve natural resources, do things more precisely, use less fertilizer, use less water, but use it in the right way. So now you're in a position where you can actually make food safer, healthier, more attractive, higher quality, and help feed the world. And that's got to be exciting.
Is really a ledger system. It's a database essentially. The difference is that each of the participants along the supply chain, so if you had a farmer or producer, and you had a distributor, you had a transportation company, if the food was coming from overseas, and then you had obviously the retail or the end point where the consumer would purchase the food. Historically, each of those participants have had a separate database of information that they're capturing about that food item. But each of those participants are now contributing data to one single database, a ledger system, where now you have a bidirectional view of this food supply chain. All of this information has come together for us is one, we've done a project called the Internet of Tomatoes, where we connected all the devices, published all the information to the ledger system, and then we're able to understand kind of the consumer preference of a tomato. So we essentially had consumers blindly taste a 1-day-old tomato and a 10-day-old tomato, and there was no statistical difference in a consumer preference between a 1-day-old tomato and a 10-day-old tomato. And so that's what a ledger, the beauty of a ledger system is now the farmer knows where their food went. A consumer can now provide feedback and close the loop back to the ecosystem to say, there was no preference in my taste. And so now a farmer might change their harvest practices. They may not store the product at the same time.
Let's say, as a non-random example, there's an outbreak of E. coli in romaine lettuce. Typically, it would take days and weeks to trace that back to a particular farm, and a lot of times they can't even tell, so they just throw it all away. With blockchain, if you had a track and trace system in place, you could tell within a couple of seconds exactly where this head of lettuce came from. And then you don't destroy an entire crop, you destroy whatever cases of lettuce came from that particular farm and were contaminated. And therefore, you're keeping people safe because you can figure out where things originated, where there are problems.
I would say there's so much data being collected. What do you actually do with it, right? How does it actually help you? And so as we start to learn about more and more of the data and we start to make sense of that data, I think better decisions will be made, and then there'll be a sharing and a collaboration of sharing that data, because to date, the food supply chain has been very analog and not digital. And so as that data comes to life and can be shared, I think you'll start to see some of those collaborations and the benefit of those collaborations.
So artificial intelligence is just essentially a fancy term for describing how you can find out relationships between different sets of data. And these relationships are able to be automatically found by computers using various algorithms. And once they find these relationships, they can really improve efficiencies in various kinds of ways.
It's a way to deal with information when the information is not well structured, not well understood, when you're trying to make decisions based on things that have a lot of context or are incomplete. And so, computers used to be pretty linear in the way they solve problems. And with artificial intelligence, what you're doing is making it possible for machines to do some reasoning and decision making on their own based on patterns of information and the context in which the information lives.
There's all these data sets like satellites, sensors, whatever your data set is. We can train AI models that are able to use that data to predict actionable insights about what you need to do on the farm, like how much you need to irrigate or water, and that improves your efficiency. Growers, they can benefit from a variety of different things because they're a very, very diverse kind of group. But essentially, there is often a need for these kinds of platforms. The kinds of data that are coming out from various data sources are not necessarily easily interpretable without any kind of AI going on top of it. What a satellite sees when a satellite images an area is basically like the brightness bar on your smartphone. The amount of brightness is literally the amount of photons that were picked up by the camera on the satellite. And that's all that a satellite sees, the count of the number of photons, the brightness level. And then based on those brightness levels, we're able to use AI to convert that into soil moisture, soil carbon, and other information. So the system, the computer has studied all of these brightness levels over the course of many days, several different locations on the planet, and learned how to convert those brightness levels into actionable insights. So that's where the value comes in from using a platform like this.
It's not like the small grower is going to use AI themselves. They're going to take information from a platform or provider or service provider that's using AI to help them make decisions. So for example, there's some farms in Australia that are using AI, but what's happening is the provider is taking weather data and climate data and all kinds of contextual information from the whole country to help an individual grower make decisions about where they are. So they're getting, all of the context that they need, and they're getting the information in a digestible way.
One of the problems that we're working on has been weeding. AI and machine learning has been imperative to do that. I don't think we could do that at the level that we're doing it at without those technologies. For the reason that, it's very hard to distinguish from a plant and a weed, or a viable plant that you want to keep and a weed. They're both green, they're both composed of, the same materials. So I think AI enables us to do that much more efficiently than other more basic technologies. Lettuce is a very fickle crop, it's very delicate, and so it requires a higher level of precision than other crops. Lettuce is also a crop in which herbicides are not allowed, other than some pre-emergence herbicides, but once the plant is out of the ground, you can't really spray with herbicides, so weeding is a much harder problem to solve than in other crops. So for that reason, I think our technologies at the moment is very well suited for lettuce at this stage, and some of the crops in the Salinas Valley. But there's a world in which regulatory, laws and regulations are becoming more and more widespread against herbicides, which makes our product really scalable across a large number of crops.
There's a farm in Pescadero, California, called Tomcat, which is using big data and precision agriculture and AI and analytics to decide how cattle ranches should be designed and structured, and how the grasses should be grown and what kinds of grasses and where the cattle should be grazing at any given moment. And that takes that kind of farming to a whole new level.
So I believe personally that AI can be used on both large farms and on smaller farms. Of course, to differing degrees, but even for the smaller farmers, using data sources like satellite data, which is very, very extensive, along with other kinds of localized data sources, we can provide an insight even for a 1-acre farm. But even these farmers can actually begin to benefit without even having to pay any large amount of sum for buying any sensors or any of that. They can start to benefit just from the satellite data and AI analyses on top of that.
I see the world of automation going everywhere from, the beginning stages of, seeding to harvesting and obviously processing. There's some automation that's already taken place at processing plants, but I see it going from beginning to end, really. Whether it's driverless tractors or whether it's thinning, weeding, cultivating, all the way to harvesting. and then packing, shipping. So really from beginning to end. Those are all processes that I believe can be solved with technology. Yeah. I think that ag and tech will optimize labor. I think there will always be humans working in the fields, but they will be aided by technology. And I think humans will be more efficient and smarter because of technology. I think farming will always need people, but I think we can accomplish what we're accomplishing now with less people in smarter ways and more sustainable ways. Farming is a very labor-intensive process, so it's painful to iterate and incorporate new processes. Growers, as they are, already manage very large operations and they're spread very thin. So it takes two sides that are really willing to commit to a problem with a mutual understanding that it's probably going to take a few years to figure out.